This is Right from the Deep.
I'm Karen Ball.
And I'm Erin Taylor Young. And this is the podcast from writers for writers, answering the question,
why am I doing this?
Right. As writers, editors,
and a former literary agent,
we're in the deep with you,
encouraging you and equipping you to find your truest story in the deep places.
Get our show notes and more, including a free audio download on how to safeguard your writer's heart at rightfromthedeep.com.
Hey guys, here's what's happening at Right from the Deep.
First, thank you to our patrons on Patreon. You guys, you make us smile and you help make this podcast possible. Anyone out there who wants to add their support, you can visit patreon.com. That's patreon.com/rightfromthedeep.
A big thank you to our September sponsor of the month. You know who she is, Christy Bass Adams.
Yay, Christy.
She's the author of a devotional titled Learning as I Go, Big Lessons from Little People, and a middle grades novel, The Adventures of Cricket and Kyle, Imagination Checkers. She's also a speaker and leads women's conferences and Bible studies, and she's a monthly contributor to Inspire a Fire and a newspaper columnist for Green Publishing.
Thank you, Christy. I'm delighted to say that I will be at the Florida Christian Writers Conference. That's coming up next month, y'all, in Leesburg, Florida, October 16th through the 20th. And there will be a link in the show notes. Hope you guys will consider it. I'd love to meet you there. And it's my turn to do a wonder. Well, y'all know I've been doing landscaping probably because I talk about it because it's, occupies a lot of my time. And there's this section in our landscaping that it feels off somehow, like awkward. And I'm standing there and I'm staring at it because I'm reworking stuff and getting weeds out, and I'm staring and I'm trying to figure it out. I do this a lot. I stand there and I stare. Alan comes out. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm thinking. But slowly I came to the conclusion that it was really just like this one sharp corner in the edging that was causing all the awkwardness. And now I'm standing there bemoaning the fact that I've got this stupid awkward corner in my edging, and God gives me this revelation. It doesn't need to be there. I can change it. It's just always been that way, but I can actually cover that edging or rip it out and change it into a curve. Probably just cover it. That'll be easier. But that's going to make a huge difference. And I'm thankful for the inspiration that God gave me, right? It was just great. And this nudge to challenge my preconception. And it reminded me that, guys, we all need to be doing this. We need to do this regularly. Like, what things are we just accepting because it's just always been that way? What if one small adjustment can change everything? So I want to encourage you all just to ask God to open your eyes to these little things, these small adjustments that can change everything. And guess what? The wonder is He will.
Amen.
And now, here's the show. Welcome, listeners, into the deep. We are excited. Today is part 2 of our interview with Grace Fox, and we are going to be talking about some specific strategies for writers' conferences, and you don't want to miss it. And we're going to jump right in.
So let's talk about how people go to conferences and the things that are helpful and the things that are not. First of all, let's talk about false expectations like you guys were addressing. Why should I spend the money if I don't get a contract? How do I justify the expense to my spouse? You have that attitude, I'm ready to be published, I've really got this, but what if you're not? So how do you deal with those things? Why should you spend that kind of money if you don't get a contract out of it?
It's just what we were saying earlier. It's about growing those relationships. It's about laying a strong foundation. I'll put it that way. So you go and you learn. You learn as much as you possibly can about the craft of writing. But with that, you have to have a teachable spirit.
Yes.
And so to go in to say, I'm here to learn and take in as much as you can, but also know that it can feel like information overload at times. And so it's okay to skip out on one of those workshops if you need to just decompress, to get your notes in order and to get your thoughts put together again, or to just go to your room and have a quiet time and pray. And that's what I would say too. Go in with prayer, and even have friends praying for you as you go. Because like I went for the cards, but it turned out to not be about the cards at all. God
Right.
just used that to get me there.
Well, and
But
I want to encourage people that sometimes he calls you to go to a writer's conference and it has nothing to do with your writing career.
Mm,
It has to do with you meeting people who get you on the right track as far as your perspective, understanding that God may be calling you to write something for one person. And if you write something and only one person reads it and it changes their life, it's worth it. The expense is worth it. The investment is worth it. It's all worth it because you're doing what God has asked you to do.
mhm. Very
that's
much.
beautiful. It really is about obedience.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And I think too, learning in my career with writing, I've met so many people who think that the end all is writing a book. Gotta write a
Yeah.
book, gotta write a
Yeah.
book. But to realize, and you learn these kinds of things at a conference, that there is a huge audience out there with magazines.
Yeah.
And so with a book, maybe your book will sell 2,000 copies in its lifetime. But in one magazine article, you might reach 250,000 people.
Right. Right.
So you don't know those things unless you start going to conferences and learning from those people that are in the know in that industry.
Right.
And it's about getting your expectations straight, your expectations of why God is calling you to this. You need to go with an open mind and an open heart and spirit and say, what is it you want from me, Lord? Not what do you want to give me, Lord, but what
Yes.
is it that you want from me? Because it may be the bridge to something entirely different. It may be the bridge, like you say, to writing articles or even devotionals, our daily bread. That devotional goes out to so many people. And I hear from so many people who read it and who have their favorite writers who are in it. And they touch lives and they change lives. You never know what God is calling you to.
Right.
Exactly.
And I love, Grace, how supportive your spouse was. Your husband
Yes.
was, he was like, we're justifying the expense because God told you to go.
Right.
You know,
Right.
consequently, it's justified. We're doing what God wants us to do. And I love what you said too about it being an education. I mean, people go back to school all the time and nobody questions that expense to pay for a class or whatever. This is the same thing. You're paying really for a lot of classes. And, you know, some conferences are more expensive than others, but they're still about education. And it's, let me tell you, cheaper than college tuition.
Amen.
Relationships that you make there. I am still friends with some of the women that I met in 1999. We still communicate and support each other in our writing.
Right. Right. Well, and I met Karen at a writing conference.
Exactly. And so much came out of that beyond the publishing her book, Surviving Henry. I mean, it's amazing what God can accomplish if we're open to letting him do his will and his plans instead of ours.
Right.
I loved what you said about who was it again who said, don't stop until God tells you to?
That was Matt Anderson.
We all need to remember that because if you go into a conference and you have the expectation, like you did, I've got this down, I'm ready, I'm going to get a contract, and then you don't, or you're told that you need to learn how to do this or this or this better. And that can be just devastating if you go in thinking that you're already ready, which frankly, from the other side of the desk, from the editor's side of the desk at writers' conferences, I met a lot of writers who thought they were ready to be published and they weren't even close, which is not to say anything against the writers. It's simply, you don't just walk into an operating room after reading a novel about a heart surgery and decide to do heart surgery. And it's like that as a writer. You don't just sit down and write something and then think, okay, now let's go get it published. You have to spend time learning the craft. And so if you're not, if you go to a writer's conference and they're telling you that you need to do this and this and this, don't look at that as something depressing. Look at that as your orders, your marching orders. Don't stop writing until God tells you to do so.
That's right, because we want to do what God's called us to do with
Right.
excellence.
Yes.
Well, and also, Grace, what I love about what you were doing was you're digging in and you're learning everything you can. And right away, you started to pivot to articles, which is a great way to hone your craft. And it's a great way to learn how to write to deadline. And you're making connections. You're making a reputation for yourself amongst editors, even if ultimately someone wants to write novels. So fine, do that. But also think about these writing these articles is a great way to reach people, to gain audience, to learn, and to be a professional, and might even make more money that way, which could help support other conferences or other things you're doing as you're also writing a novel.
I would give a
Exactly.
caution though. We've used several times the phrase "you're making connections." Again, from the editor's side of the desk, I can tell you it was obvious when someone came to talk to me or sit at my table during a meal, and it was to make a connection, a professional connection. It wasn't because they cared anything about me as a person, or they were looking at me as an individual, or God had asked them to sit next to me. It was simply that they thought talking to me was a good strategic connection.
Hmm.
It's not about connections so much as relationship. The people that I met at these conferences who shared passions for the things that I had passions for, who came to me with a teachable spirit, like you're talking about, those are the people who are still in my life, the people who are still a large part of my resources and my accountability teams, because they know me so well and they know God so well, and we can speak truth to each other at the same time that we can encourage each other and we can challenge each other. And so don't go in thinking about making professional connections. Just ask God who he wants you to meet.
Mhm.
He's got his reasons for that.
Yeah, I love that, especially when you can't control. There are some conferences you can't always control who your appointment might be with, and
Right.
it is lovely to just sit down. I've taken appointments at conferences. It's lovely to just sit down and have someone come along and just chat with you,
Right.
just to learn who they are and just to talk about what's happening, in the writing world, or what are the needs of the publisher, or just to visit. I've had some lovely visits with people, and I'm sure Karen has too. Uh,
Right.
so that's good.
I've been on faculty too at a bunch of conferences where, and I've done those appointments as well. And I agree with what you're saying with both of you, because they're different types of people, and some will come in and put the writing down in front, and then want the editors to put the stamp of approval and just get them on their way, right? And
Right.
sometimes you can tell that they're not ready. There is some more work that needs to be done, and so uh, I say too, watch the attitude with which you approach the editors, because they are people as well. And sometimes they may be coming in and maybe they've just had a tragedy in their family, but they're only a month beyond that, and here they are back at work, and they may be struggling in some ways. And if they look like they're disinterested, don't think they're disinterested. It may be that they're just a little preoccupied because they've got something personal going on. There's all kinds of dynamics that happen at a conference, and to go in and be sensitive to those dynamics, whether they be to editors at the table that you're sitting at, or whom you have an appointment, or the other attendees.
Yeah.
So some are discouraged. Oh my goodness, I've been at conferences where they get their rejections, and they've gone in with thinking that they had it in the bag and they had a deal ready to sign, but they were rejected and they're in tears. And
Yeah.
so to go in as someone who's willing to minister.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because it might not be about you. God might send you to a writing conference for something that you can offer to someone else, some thought, some prayer, some who knows what, a word of encouragement. And you might be there for that. And that's still being obedient and still being used by God and still contributing to the overall words truth going forth in this world. We can contribute even if we didn't write a word. What if we encourage somebody who did write something that just took off, or who knows what. I mean, it's just God is so much bigger than we give him credit for.
So let me recap some strategies that we've hit on here for going to writers' conferences. First of all, if you're going, make sure that it's because God is calling you to do so. And if it comes to justifying the expense, just as Grace did, God is calling to me this, and this is an investment in what He's asking me to do, to write. And so, in order to be obedient, you need to go. But in obedience, you have to be strategic, and you guys jump in whenever you want. I think the first strategy is to check your expectations at the door.
Yeah.
We talked about false expectations, and I think you just have to go with no expectations. Don't think you're going to get a contract. Don't think that your career is just going to take off here. Instead, go in asking God what He wants to show you. Go in with an open heart and mind and spirit for what He wants to show you.
Right.
Ask him for those divine appointments.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those are so much fun. When they happen, you
Yes.
know when they've happened.
Right. Right. Those are great.
And check your ego at the door. Be teachable. That's something that we've said several times. Be teachable in your spirit. Don't feel as though people are rejecting you. What they're saying is you can do better.
Yeah.
That actually is a form of belief in you. And so take it as such and let it nurture you and nourish you and move forward in what you've been shown and taught.
Let me jump in here because that brings up a point. It's difficult sometimes for a new writer to get to have a meeting or
Right.
have a critique and see red pen all over. But the deal is that professional writers, career writers, writers who've published 30 books still get red pen all over.
Indeed.
I mean, like Karen has been an editor. She's put red pen all over things. I know I have too. Guys, there's multi-published authors who've had, a 30-page letter from me, a macro letter. And it doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing. And it doesn't mean that you're bad. And it doesn't mean that you should be discouraged, because this is the process. We all get this critique, this thing to make our writing better. That's what we go to learn how to do and to hear from. It's a normal part of the process.
And I can tell you, Erin and I are both writers and editors. I've been an editor for close to 40 years and worked with best-selling writers, with Francine Rivers and Karen Kingsbury and a lot of people. And they all need editors. We all need
Right.
editors. As a writer, when I'm functioning as a writer, I love getting those letters from my editor. Now, I don't always agree with everything that they write, but I know that what they are saying is, this is good, but you can do better. And it's because of that belief in who I am as a writer. And when editors at these conferences say, this isn't quite what we need, but have you considered, and then they give you guidance, that's because they believe in you.
When I went to that first writers conference, yeah, I should have checked my ego at the door. I wrote 3 sample devotions as a part of the fee of going there, that they could be critiqued by somebody. So I asked an editor of a beautiful women's devotional magazine to critique those. So I sat at her table one meal, and she recognized my name. She said, "Oh yeah, I read some of your stuff." And I'm thinking, "Oh yeah, here we go." And she said to me, "It was okay, but they're just too long for our publication." And you know what? My devotion, I'd never written devotions in my life until I did those 3. They were like 800 words
Oh my
long. And she was looking for something more like 350 to 400. So when she said they were a little long, she said, I know that you could cut them down and get them down to 350, 400. I had the gall to say, "Oh, I don't think so." And she said, "Oh, yes, you could." I said, "No, I don't think I could do that and maintain the integrity of the piece." That's what I told this woman. Needless to say, I've never written for her. But there was another editor who I ended up at the airport with at the same time for our flights at the conference end. She said, "Show me what you submitted." So we had breakfast together. I pulled out that first devotion and slid it across the table to see what she would do. She butchered it with red ink. Let me tell you, she said, "Oh, Grace. Now, give me the second one." She did it again. And then when she got to the third one, she started in with her red pen. I'm just dying by that point. I'm dying. But she took the palm of her hand and slapped her forehead and went, "Oh, Grace. No, oh, forget it. Just go home and do what I said." And I went home with those devotions all marked up in red pen. And I did what she said.
Mm.
She showed me how to cut things down from 800 words to 350. And now I have a hard time going bigger because I know how to write tight.
Grace, that's Grace right there. That is a God gift that somebody also then, after, you still wouldn't listen, somebody would go through and do those things. One of the neat things about all this, obviously, we have all made mistakes. Mistakes, mistakes, mistakes. And guess what? Our careers did not die. And I want to encourage people out there that one mistake is not going to ruin your career. So be okay. We're going to learn, we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to be humble about it and and then follow advice.
Grace, do you have any final words of wisdom for our listeners about writers' conferences?
I think I would just summarize what we've already talked about in saying absolutely go with a teachable heart. And what you think you're going for may not be at all what God has in mind. It might even be about ministering to somebody in the airport on your way or the person in the plane beside you. God's purposes are so much bigger than ours. So go with that
Amen.
wide open heart.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for joining us today. You can find previous episodes and more resources at writefromthedeep.com.
And I bet you know someone who needs this podcast, so please share it with them.
So until next time,
Embrace the deep.
your writing and your life will never be the same.